Hello there and welcome to our Trustees Week webinar on Trustees and Fundraising. My name is Tracy Bird and I run the SCVO Trustees Network, which is sponsored by Rathbones Investment Management, and their support enables us to run these webinars. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. And just to note that this webinar is being recorded, so do switch off your camera if you prefer not to be on screen. And the recording will be available later on the SCVO website. We've also got closed captioning enabled, but if you'd rather not see that, my colleague Joanne will put instructions in the chat on how to remove it. We'll also email out all slides from today, along with further resources for you. So I'm delighted to be joined by many experts in the field of fundraising today. I'll briefly introduce them, perhaps they can wave as I do, but they can tell you more about what they do when they speak. So we have with us Jamie McIntosh and Hazel Crombie from the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, Anne Hughes, who is a trustee with Children First, Jane Griffin from SCVO, and Stephen Shearers, Yvonne Evans, and Dion Denovan from the Scottish Fundraising Standards panel. So I'm going to hand over first to Jamie, who's chair of the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, and he's also CEO of Scottish Love in Action. Do put your questions in the chat as we go, and we'll have time at the end to look at them. So over to you, Jamie, and I'm going to get your slides on screen. Can everybody see that? Great.
Hi, everyone. So as Tracy has kindly said, my name is Jamie McIntosh, and just for a brief bit of background, for 12 years I've been a fundraising professional. Along the way I've served as a trustee. I'm chief executive of a charity which is called Scottish Love in Action, and I currently serve as chair of the Chartered Institute of Fundraising Scotland. Trustees have a key role to play in ensuring that your charity's approach to fundraising is consistent with your charity's purpose, values, and culture. A successful fundraising programme can change a charity's future. It will secure the resources that the charity needs to deliver its impact, while establishing long-term supporter relationships. It can be incredibly rewarding to be a part of that. But remember, fundraising is about much more than bringing in the money. Fundraising is one of the most visible aspects of a charity's work. Fundraising activity can shape opinion, embody the values of your charity, and set the tone for your public image and brand. However, sometimes fundraising activity can be disconnected from the rest of an organisation's activities. As a trustee, you have an important role to play. You bring the different parts of your charity together under a shared approach. So why am I presenting? I'm just on to the next slide, thanks. The Chartered Institute of Fundraising published Trustees and Fundraising in Scotland. This guidance is specifically for trustees of Scottish charities. It can be downloaded free of charge from the Chartered Institute of Fundraising website, and as you can see the links there. This guide was made possible thanks to funding from the Scottish Government, and it'll help you to ensure your approach to fundraising meets your charity's legal and ethical responsibilities. To bring this advice to life, we've included case studies from Scottish charities. You may have already downloaded a copy, but certainly I practice what I preach. I've already downloaded my copy, and the Board of Trustees where I work, we are already using it. So let's start by considering trustees' responsibilities for fundraising. So on to the next slide. The Office for Scottish Charity Regulation, or OSCR, their guidance on charity trustee duties and fundraising outlines 3 main duties, which I've listed here. Firstly, they say that trustees should act in the interests of the charity. What does that mean? Well, that involves doing what is best for your beneficiaries and putting the interests of your charity above any organisation or individual. You should be able to show how the money you spend on fundraising is in the best interests of your charity. Secondly, OSCR says that trustees should act with care and diligence. This means any decision made should be done so with a level of care and diligence expected of a person managing the affairs of another person. In practice, this involves justifying investment into fundraising, accounting for any money generated, monitoring fundraising performance, and embedding your charity's values into fundraising practices. And thirdly, Oscar says that trustees should comply with the 2005 Act. Now, the long-winded form of that is the Charities and Trustee Investment Scotland Act 2005. But as I say, for short, it's often known as the 2005 Act. And it simply outlines the requirements for fundraising. And they're also explained in a bit more detail in another piece of legislation called the Charities and Benevolent Fundraising Scotland Regulations 2009. So I've gone through those very quickly, but if you'd like to know more about a trustee's fundraising responsibilities, I've provided 3 links at the foot of the slide, and as Tracy said, she'll circulate these slides afterwards. So if we're moving on, now let's get to grips with the rules and regulations for fundraising. So on to the next slide. There are many rules and regulations in place for charity fundraising that are designed to protect both the public and charities themselves. A good understanding of the regulatory framework and best practice for fundraising is important for all trustees. The regulations, I know, can seem daunting, but really the 2 main bodies to be aware of in Scotland are OSCAR, which stands for Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator, and then secondly, the Scottish Fundraising Adjudication Panel. Now, Dion from the Scottish Fundraising Adjudication Panel is speaking today, so I'll only briefly touch on what their remit is, and said I'll focus on everything else, as there's more than enough content for me to cover in my slot. So while the UK has a self-regulatory framework for charity fundraising, there are also statutory laws in place for charities. As a trustee, you're responsible for ensuring that your charity observes all relevant laws and standards. Although the legal framework may seem complex, there are some simple principles to follow and resources to guide you on your way. So I've listed down some things here. So first of all, is your fundraising programme fully compliant with the Act I mentioned earlier on, OSCAR's 2005 Act? What about, have you signed up to the Scottish Fundraising Adjudication Panel's fundraising guarantee? And that's the logo, as you can see on the right-hand side. And don't worry, Dion hasn't paid me, but this is something which my own charity does. So certainly, again, I practice what I preach. It's something which helps your charity to demonstrate you're committed to good fundraising. And currently, there are 314 charities which are signed up to the fundraising guarantee. Nextly, is your charity registered with OSCAR? And whenever you're fundraising, do you display your charity's name and charity number on fundraising materials? Now that's sort of the basics, but you can also go one step further. And OSCAR have designed a logo that you can see on the right-hand side, a badge, and that allows your charity, which you can download free of charge from their website, and you can put that on things like email signatures, publications, and that just goes that one stage further to demonstrate trust. What about, does your charity have a complaints process specifically for fundraising? Or do you monitor how many complaints you receive? Are you legal, open, honest, and respectful in all of your fundraising? And is your charity's fundraising approach in keeping with your own charity's governing objectives? So there are many laws that regulate how money is raised and spent. Specific legislation exists for a wide range of fundraising activity, from house-to-house collections to relationships with a fundraising consultant. And the 2 laws which are most relevant to fundraising are the Charities and Trustee Investment Act 2005 and the Charities and Benevolent Fundraising Regulations 2009 Act. So yeah, if you move on to the next slide, thank you. So fundraising is also subject to broader non-charity specific legislation. Fundraising is probably one of the most regulated industries there are. So just to highlight a few of those, and I say the rules for these are set and enforced by other regulators. So there's the Information Commissioner's Office, also known as the ICO, and they regulate data protection. There's the Scottish Information Commissioner, and they're responsible for enforcing freedom of information laws. There's the Gambling Commission, and it regulates gambling activities, including charity lotteries. Ofcom regulates the communications industry, including telephone marketing. And local authorities provide permits for public charitable collections and licenses for small society lotteries. So say quite a lot of the regulators there, but I've displayed some of the logos on the right-hand side. So how can you ensure that your charity doesn't break the law when fundraising? So on to the next slide. So you should try to minimise conflicts of interest relating to the acceptance or refusal of donations. You should ensure that your charity funds are spent on the purpose for which they were raised. Your charity should be clear about fundraising costs, and any solicitation statements about campaign costs when working with third parties should also be included. Your charity should treat donor data responsibly and according to UK legislation, as I mentioned earlier on about GDPR. Your charity should also have a written agreement in place if you are working with a fundraising consultant or a commercial organisation who you outsource some or all of your fundraising operations to. And your fundraising should abide by the rules set out in your charity's governing document and always stay true to your charitable purpose. And lastly, your charity should file your annual return with Oscar on time. But more than that, you should also include any relevant information about fundraising activity. So then I'd like to touch on ethics and best practice surrounding fundraising. And if we'll just move on again to the next slide, thanks. So building trust and confidence in your charity and the wider sector is so important. So certainly for me now being chair of the Trustee Fundraising Scotland, I recognise that I'm not just representing my own charity where I work and where I'm a trustee of, but also the wider sector. And so what one charity's actions obviously have an impact on the wider Scotland charitable sector. So as a trustee, you're responsible for ensuring your charity doesn't just do things legally, but they also do them to the highest possible standards. Now, the rules for fundraising are set out in the Code of Fundraising Practice, and that is overseen in Scotland by the Scottish Fundraising Adjudication Panel. You should review the Code of Fundraising Practice, and you should set clear policies for your charity's approach to fundraising, making sure it's consistent with your own ethical values. While trustees can be held legally accountable for all aspects of a charity's work, accountability and transparency are at the heart of all fundraising. You can give donors, beneficiaries, and other stakeholders a better understanding of how your charity works and fundraises by being accountable and transparent. Now, accountability and transparency are two words we use regularly, but what exactly do they mean? So just touching on them very briefly, accountability is about being responsible for and able to explain, clarify, and justify your charity's actions. Charities have a duty to be accountable as they have a privileged status because of their purposes must be for the benefit of the public. And transparency, what do I mean by that? Transparency means that you need to be easy to understand and you must be open and honest in all of your charity communications, transactions, and operations. So you shouldn't shy away from answering questions about how your charity is run and what your costs are, particularly fundraising costs, your policies, and other things like that. And so on to the next slide. So I appreciate that I've covered a lot of ground this afternoon, but remember that you're not alone. The Chartered Institute of Fundraising Scotland, we are the professional body for fundraisers and for fundraising, and we're here to help. And if you'd like to continue the discussion on trustees and fundraising, you can also find me on LinkedIn. So that's me on my part, and I'm now going to hand over to Dion from the Scottish Fundraising Adjudication Panel. Thanks.
Thanks, Jamie. I'll just share my screen. So hi, I'm Dion Denovan. I am the Marketing and Administration Assistant for the Independent Fundraising Standards and Adjudication Panel, or the Scottish Fundraising Adjudication Panel, as we're better known as, or the panel for short, because that is a heck of a mouthful. So the panel was established for the purpose of overseeing the system of enhanced self-regulation of fundraising in Scotland. to be responsible for fundraising standards in Scotland and to address fundraising complaints related to Scottish registered charities. Fundraising in Scotland is subject to a system of enhanced self-regulation, which is overseen by the panel and carried out in line with the Code of Fundraising Practice. So the panel enables the system of enhanced self-regulation through the use of a three-stage complaints process. So stage one is complain to the charity directly. It's important that charities receive feedback so that they can address specific concerns and improve their fundraising practices. So stage one is always for the complainant or the member of the public to speak to the charity to see if it can be resolved that way. Stage two is to appeal to the charity's trustees. If the complainant remains unhappy with how the complaint had been handled or feel that the issues that raised were not fully addressed, an appeal should be made to the charity's trustees. I should note here, some charities only have a one-stage complaints process because the trustees are the first point of contact, so the 1 and 2 combine essentially. At that point, if it's still not resolved, stage 3 is to refer to the Scottish Fundraising Education Panel. If the complainant remains unhappy with how the charity has addressed their complaint, they can then refer the complaint to the panel. So that's just an overview of the three-stage complaints process. And I'm going to pass you over to my colleague, Yvonne, who's going to talk to you about the next stage.
Thanks, Dion. Hello, everyone. I'm Yvonne Evans. I'm a lecturer at the University of Dundee and I'm a member of the panel. Used to be a lawyer in practice advising charities and trusts on this. I just want to talk a little bit about the kind of jurisdiction of the panel and deciding which regulator is the one that would be dealing with any issues. And it very much just depends on whether you've got a Scottish charity, a charity in England and Wales, or whether you've got what we call a cross-border charity. So if you're registered in Scotland with Oscar only, then you would fall under our remit, the Scottish Fundraising Adjudication Panel, and you should register with us, as has been mentioned already, for the Good Fundraising Guarantee. If your charity operates in England and Wales only, then we wouldn't be dealing with this. It would be the fundraising regulator. But if you have one of these cross-border charities, and lots of charities are obviously cross-border, then it depends on where you're primarily registered. So if you're primarily registered with Oscar, likely is you're mainly operating here in Scotland, then you would fall under our remit. But if you're primarily registered with the CCEW, the Charity Commission of England and Wales, then you would fall under the fundraising regulator, even if it's dealing with an issue that has arisen in Scotland. So that's generally how it works. And I think this is quite a helpful diagram showing that separation. Thank you. And I'll go on to talk a little bit now about trustees and the complaints process. Jamie has been very helpful in setting a lot of this out already. Thank you, Jamie. But ultimately, the legal responsibility for complying with all of this is on the trustees. So it is a big responsibility. It's quite onerous, but you know, there's lots of sources, as Jamie said, to try and help you with this. It's really important, as Jamie says, that you make sure you're acting in the best interests of the charity in the decisions that you're making to do with fundraising, and really importantly that you're complying with the 2005 Act. It's really important that you kind of apply this to all your policy making in terms of fundraising. You have to, in particular, manage any risks or any conflicts of interest that might arise, and this is to do with acting in the best interests of the charity rather than sort of individual trustees or any other interests that might come up. And thinking about your fundraising activities and how they best support your charitable aims of your charity. Being compliant with the law, for example, carefully looking at any agreements that you might have with third-party fundraisers, reviewing those, checking how they're working, checking that they comply with the code of fundraising practice and so on. Ideally trying to make sure that you've covered eventualities before anything does go wrong in terms of setting out these kinds of agreements. Making sure, for example, that you've got the licensing or permissions that you need in place in terms of collecting before it happens and so on. And generally you're responsible for protecting your charity from any kind of dispute that could come up if something goes wrong. And if that requires taking advice, then that's a good idea to make sure you're complying with that. You have to be familiar with the code of fundraising practice, so there's lots of good information online about the code, and the main fundamental principles here are being legal, open, honest and respectful, and I think that's all I'd want to cover. Thank you. I'll pass on to my colleague on the panel, Stephen.
Good afternoon. My name's Stephen Sherris. I am the fundraising governance and compliance manager at Cats Protection at my day job, and my night job is being on the panel. And I want to talk to you today about what you should do if you receive a fundraising complaint. And the first thing is, to quote Douglas Adams, don't panic. Anyone who's ever been involved with fundraising will tell you that complaints will happen. So don't panic when they do. It is not necessarily the end of the world. At first, what the best thing to do is just listen and be respectful. Make sure you get down everything that the complainant is telling you about, so you can understand the complaint, work out exactly what the nature of the complaint is. Is it about a particular fundraising method? Is it about a particular way that fundraising method happened? Is it maybe about a member of staff? You then need to investigate that complaint, and that means sitting down with those in the team who were involved in that fundraising event and getting their side of the story. We all know that there are many sides to every story, so it's important to get all this information down in a factual and clear way, and that's where the proactive bit comes from. The more you take control of the situation, the easier it will be to manage for you as a trustee. So keep in control of the complaint, keep on top of it, give updates to the person who's put in the complaint. If it's going to take a bit of time to get additional information because of holiday or sickness or whatever, be open, say, look, it will take a little bit longer than we hope to get the information back to you. Next slide, please. To help this process, what you need is a complaints handling procedure, which is easy to navigate. This should set out in clear, simple English, what is the process of if someone has a complaint, a fundraising complaint about your charity? Who is it? For example, if it was me, who should I be contacting first of all? Is that by email? Is that by phone? Is that by letter? How long will it take to respond to that complaint? Will it take 28 days, for example, which is perfectly fair. Give yourself a bit of time to work through it. When you're investigating complaints, you've got to do it in a thoroughly impartial way. So you're not necessarily just assuming that your staff are right and the complainant is wrong, but also on the other side as well. So you've got to be respectful to that complaint and their experience. And then once you've concluded your investigation and kind of come to your decision about the complaint, whether it was valid or not, be able to demonstrate the evidence for that. Show what you've got to say that, this complaint is justified or not justified, whatever the answer might be. But be accountable. If you made a mistake, if the charity's made a mistake, apologize for it. Explain how you'll do your learning from it. And that's the main thing. Complaints are learning opportunities. If you learn from this mistake, then hopefully you won't do it again in the future. So this is the kind of the process that we suggest as a good way of handling a complaint. And that's the end of me. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm going to hand over to Anne to tell you a bit about being a trustee and fundraising. Just before I leave the panel, I just wondered, in terms of numbers of complaints, are they going up every year? Are they about the same? Are they going down? What are you finding on the panel?
I would say it's holding steady. We're not seeing any dramatic increase nor decrease, but yeah, we're holding the line.
Good. Well,
the fundraising regulator reporting similar numbers as well. So,
right. Okay, that's interesting. Thanks. Hopefully, people are getting better at this kind of thing. Okay, Anne, over to you.
Hi, Thank you, Tracy. Hi everyone, my name is Anne Hughes. I have been a fundraiser for almost 25 years, and 4 or 5 years ago I decided to become freelance, and that was sort of happened almost by accident because I hadn't planned to, but I was offered a piece of work that was a good opportunity and it was on a freelance basis. And so my career has always been, it's the only place I've ever worked is in the third sector as a fundraiser. About 4 years ago, while I was on that freelance journey, I came across Mary Glasgow, the chief exec of Children First, and during that meeting, which was about something completely different, of course, she asked me if I would be interested in joining the board of Children First. Now, as a career fundraiser, my immediate reaction was, oh my God, no, because I had always put trustees, I had put the board as somewhere that was something that wasn't me. And so I suppose what I want to talk to you about today is that experience of me being a fundraiser, but also being on a board, what I look for, but also what I get from it. And if there is, because when I was sharing this the last couple of weeks on my LinkedIn, I was certainly saying to colleagues that are fundraisers, you know, come and listen to this, because I'm always encouraging fundraisers to join boards. I don't think we necessarily all see ourselves as board members, but I think our contribution can be substantial. So yeah, so that's that. So I think that the first thing, and it was actually one of my friends also from the sector who I think is on the call, Vary, who said to me when I was beginning this journey, remember you're strategic and not operational. And so I'm saying that from both sides, from being a fundraiser and also for other board members who aren't fundraisers. I am there to have the knowledge of fundraising, but to be a full board member, I am not there as a fundraiser. And therefore, I think boards have to appreciate that the person who joins the board who is a fundraiser isn't your fundraiser, they just happen to be a fundraiser. Because I've had some of the women that I mentor who I've encouraged to join boards, they've joined smaller charity boards and they have become the de facto fundraiser, meaning they're working about 60 hours a week. And so I think that's something that I think both sides should be quite aware of. And yeah, and it's hard, I think, as a fundraiser and as a corporate community fundraiser, which is where my sort of early days of my career were. I don't know how not to be operational, so it is a struggle. I'll be dead honest with you. So sometimes I am still slightly operational, but I do that as a volunteer for the charity. I do not do that as a member of the board for the charity. So I think it's just about finding that path for yourself. I think also for me as a fundraiser on a board, it's really important that I was passionate about the thing that I was choosing to be on a board for. You know, I would work for different charities, and as a freelancer, I certainly do. And I get to be passionate about many things or not so passionate about other things. But when it comes to sitting on a board, sitting on the board of Children First, knowing that I was going to have an impact on the future of children and how they should be put first in Scotland is really important to me. I think especially important to me was that if I can help through being on the board of this organisation, other mothers keep their families together, then surely that is a massive part of what my purpose is. I'm always driven to help women and to help women rise into their lives. And so that was a huge part of it for me. Something that I actually was speaking to a colleague about this morning is about when you are if you are a fundraiser listening to this, that you understand what you're consenting to when you join a board, that you understand accounts, that you understand it's nobody else's job. Just like I'm not the fundraiser for the organisation, my colleague on the board who is an accountant is not the accountant for the organisation. I need to understand it all just the way they do. And I think that's big. What is my responsibilities here? Should not be the fund. Sorry, I'm just looking at a wee question there, sorry. And I should have said, welcome in any questions. I was saying that a trustee not be the fundraiser for the charity because I'm not the fundraiser. So if I pull that into Max, I'm not the fundraiser. Gary Kernahan's the director of fundraising at Children First. He's got a full fundraising team. I'm not there to fundraise. I do fundraise because it's what I want to do, but I do that just as way any other volunteer would do. And so no, I'm not the fundraiser. And boards have to understand that the person who is a fundraiser that joins your board as a volunteer is not your volunteer fundraiser. They are someone who is a fundraiser, but who is also a board member, and understand, just the way the accountant understands accounts and the lawyer understands the law, the fundraiser understands fundraising, but they're there to give a strategic approach. They're not there to be operational and actually carrying out your fundraising on a weekly or a monthly basis. So if I just jump back, and if anybody does have a question, put your hand up or put it in, and I'll try and keep an eye on it. I think that understanding what you're consenting to and understanding accounts, which isn't always the most comfortable place for me to be, I'll be honest with you. It's a lot of numbers, isn't it? I'm sure you'll agree. But it's incumbent on me to understand what is happening on a board and to understanding what's happening with my organisation. And so that's something I would say every fundraiser has to, every board member has to take accountability for what's going on and keep a very, very close eye on that. It is no one else's job to do it. It is my job to do it because I sit on the board. And I think the other thing that's been really important to me on my journey, even in this year alone, obviously I've been on the board for just over 3 years. What a 3 years to be on a board, eh? But I think that, sorry, I'm trying to just remember what I was doing, what I was going to say there. Future of the board is about keeping good records and understanding why you make the decisions that you make as a board, and keeping that relevant. I say this because I'm on the board of a 137-year-old charity, and anybody having awareness about the sector, about especially children's organisations just now, will know that we've had the whole thing with Redress Scotland. Children First have signed up to Redress Scotland in quite a minimal way because we weren't overly exposed. But in that, we were having to try and find a stream of what had happened in the last 137 years of our organisation. And so I have to be able to stand by every decision that I make in my 6 years on the board of Children First, because that's the longest I can do. I have to be able to stand by that. If someone from a future board comes and asks me to explain why we made the decision we made, and it's understanding the importance of that, it's understanding, I would call it the privilege, the responsibility of holding a 137-year-old organisation in my hands and having to make the right choices. And it's something that I think that I worry that people could take on too lightly and not actually take the appreciation of what that means. It's a really important role to take on. And if you're not going to take it overly seriously, which I think we all should, then maybe you shouldn't join a board, would be my advice to people. I think also it's just about looking at the benefits for me is about being part of something that's bigger than me. Now, as a fundraiser, I always have been very different when you're in a board situation, I have to say, and which is what's been really interesting. Any colleagues who are on the call who are fundraisers, it's very interesting that I no longer have any illusion about boards being something I can't deal with, because in the past, if you had to go and speak to the board or you had to present to the board, that would have brought so much nervousness. I don't have that any longer because I know a board is just people. And I didn't know that for 22 years of my career. And yeah, so that's been really interesting. And in that freelance position that I'm in, where I'm usually working with leadership teams or working with fundraising directors and their teams, I am able to be the conduit sometimes between the senior leadership team and the board. If there's any mixed wires there, I'm often the person that is most well equipped, again, because I'm on the outside too, is well equipped to be able to negotiate that. So that's been really interesting for me too. I think that something I would say to anybody who is on a board or any fundraisers thinking about joining boards, and this is really important to me, if you say you're going to do something, you need to just do it, because what you'll find is, well, if it was your job and you said you were going to do something, you didn't do it, your line manager would come and chase you up to see why you hadn't done it. That won't necessarily happen. If I make a promise of my fundraising department at Children First, they're not going to overly chase me because I'm on their board. So when I say I do something, the accountability to actually do it falls back on me. And equally, I think we have to be any of us on a board, of course, have to be an active member of the board. I have been in as a freelancer when I'm maybe working with boards where there are people that sit around the table and don't have any real contribution. And I think if you don't want to contribute actively, then I would ask, why are you here? Because it's a big responsibility, but that's not fair. Move aside and let somebody who's willing to contribute to do that, because that is what the organisation need. They need a board who is interested, who is active, who is involved in the organisation. And really just to, I suppose, to end for what Julian is, I mean, it's a great privilege for me to sit on the board of Children First, and it's a lot. As a freelancer, I know that it's going to take about 12 or 15 days of my year where I won't get paid because I have to take the day off, obviously, if I'm doing something for the board. But the scale is still very tipped in the fact that this is a great privilege for me to do, and a real honour that I get to do this as part of my career, of my development, of just being me in the world. And I think the fact that I get to influence and shape how we put children first in Scotland, which is obviously the ambition of Children First, I'm so lucky that I get to do that in the way I do. And again, I didn't know whether a fundraiser's voice would be the right voice on a board, but 100% I bring something different. And I have got no doubts, and I'm sure my colleagues on the board of Children First would agree that I bring a different aspect to the board than any of the other colleagues. So yeah, if anybody's got any other questions, I don't know if anybody came in there, or Tracy, if you've got anything else.
I would just say that's great. Thank you, Anne. It's great to hear your own personal story and some tips for trustees that aren't fundraisers, for any trustees really. And also you touched on what you get out of being a trustee as well. So I do think it's a two-way process. It's obviously what you give to the charity, but what you get back in terms of personal development as well. I'm just going to have a quick look in the chat. There's some comments there and we can come back to them at the end. But what I'll do now is I'm going to hand over to Jane Griffin from SCVO, and Jane's just going to give you a bit of an oversight on what's going on out there in the land of fundraising and some hints and tips. And as I say, once Jane's finished, we will go to the questions. Thanks, Jane.
Thanks, Tracy. So I'm just going to canter quickly through some slides, just because I know a lot of what's on our minds just now is around the cost of living, for our beneficiaries, but also for the organisations that you're trustees of or that we're working for. So a quick chat around what's happening just now and what we're seeing at SCVO. It's different from COVID. That's the first thing that we're seeing in a lot of the discussions that are going on with funders. When we kind of entered the COVID crisis, there was a lot of immediate action from funders where they were able to put things in place pretty quickly that would support, because they knew it was time sensitive, that we had to do things quickly, and that it would be a short term. I mean, we thought shorter term than it turned out, pandemic. With the cost of living crisis, what we're seeing is a slightly different approach from funders. So a group of funders who are part of the Scottish Funders Forum, and that's independent funders in the main, have come together to look at what they can do, and they've kind of put together a set of promises, I guess, that they are trying to stick to. I've kind of paraphrased a little bit for the slide, but they've put out a statement saying that their aims are going to be to offer flexibility and trust. So that's around some of the learning that they took from COVID. There was a lot more flexibility around funds and a lot more trust that organisations would deliver what was needed on the ground. So they're trying to take that approach again within the cost of living crisis. They'll be listening and advocating, and that's for the sector as a whole. And I'll kind of touch on this in a wee second. They'll be providing support, advice and information for the projects that they fund. And they're going to try and act with urgency. So when they are doing things, they'll try and make decisions quickly, they'll try and make payments quickly, provide information quickly, just act with more urgency than maybe we have done in the past. So that's what some are offering. There's, on top of that, a whole pile of other stuff that funders are doing. Some funders have opened, or are about to, in the case of Cora Foundation, open new funds that are specifically catering for some of the issues around cost of living. They open the Household Hardship Fund on the 22nd of November. They've got information on their website. I've just received an email about it while we're in this meeting. That's for smaller organisations, and it's smaller amounts that will go directly to individuals. National Lottery Community Fund have got a cost of living support fund open just now. BBC Children in Need made an announcement yesterday of a package. Bank of Scotland Foundation have already announced what they're doing. So individual funders are doing other things, putting together new funds. They're changing funds that are already open, so trying to make them more flexible and account for some of the other issues that kind of have come about because of the cost of living crisis. Other funders are giving top-ups. So part of the Children in Need funding was to give top-ups to all their awardees. So there's lots of different things happening from funders. And I guess the question is, well, how do you find out? How do you know what they're doing? And the first thing I would say is speak to your funders. So speak to the people that are funding you now and have an honest conversation with them. Arrange a call with your grant manager. Be clear about the issues that your organisation is facing, because funders have kind of taken the view that they need to be listening and advocating for the sector. And unless the sector tell them the issues that they're facing, they can't then kind of pass that on and talk about the issues and try and encourage extra funding from statutory sources, for instance. So get a call with your grant managers, tell them what the issues are, and maybe look at what could they do that would support you. Is there need for more flexibility within a grant that you've got from them? Is that maybe a project-based grant and you're seeing that your energy prices are going sky high and there's no way that you can cover that, so therefore you wouldn't be able to deliver that project? What could they change to allow you to put some of the budget that you've got for project costs into your core costs to cover the energy, for instance? Things like that. Have those conversations with your funders. Funders are really open to speaking to awardees and would much rather that you contacted them early doors than left it until it was a real crisis situation for your organisation. So reach out early. When you're on the phone to them, ask them if they're planning stuff. We've kind of recognised that this is a longer term issue, so it's not a direct, lots of funders are not making direct changes to their funds straight away. They're waiting to see what's going to actually help much more closely on the ground. So ask them what they're planning, ask them if they are providing any top-ups or different kind of flexible arrangements, or if they've got funds opening or aiming to open in the future that might support you. Keep updated. So I guess, how do you find out about what else is happening other than through the funders that you've already got? Follow SCVO tweet. We'll tend to put out information as and when we find it out, and retweet funders that we know that are doing things. Keep an eye on our website. On the front page of the website, there's a big box with a red background that says #RunningCostCrisis. That takes you to that page, and it's got loads of information on there, including training, kind of advice and advocacy, information about energy bills and different schemes and support that's coming down the pipeline for that sort of thing. Also keep an eye on TFN. There's a links on the front of the SCVO website to the TFN website. You may well kind of get that email as well from their newsletter. It's really good at keeping up to date with all the announcements that are coming down from funders. And you might well see something there that you think, oh, actually that would suit our organisation and they don't fund us just now. We can go and have a look at it. Social media, I hate to say Twitter at the minute. If you can bear Elon Musk, then go ahead and follow funders on Twitter. They are good at putting information out there so that you can kind of find out when things are coming live, when schemes and funds are opening. And keep in touch with your grant managers, of course. The other place to look is Funding Scotland, which is our database. It's on the SCVO website. It's open to everybody. There's extra bells and whistles if you're an SCVO member, but anybody can use the website. It's updated daily with new funds. There's a weekly bulletin that's sent direct to your email, which you can sign up for. You don't have to be a member to do that, and it'll keep you up to date of any new funds that are being added. You can go in and search on lots of different categories and tags and stuff, so it's easy to find the sort of information that you're looking for. Finally, and if there's any questions, I'll take them at the end. I can see two things that popped up in chat, but I can't see chat. Some top tips on applications if you're making applications to funders that you maybe haven't applied to before. These seem really, really simple, but I'm in charge of the grant making at SCVO, and the number of times that we see people not do this, even though we repeat over and over, and it seems common sense, but do remember to read all the information that's provided by a funder about a fund. It's worth taking the time to read through, because I guarantee it will take you less time to read it, even if it seems a lot, than it will to waste your time doing an unsuccessful application. And it'll really show you what you need to do, and there's usually lots of information there to help you with an application. Speak to the funder if possible. If it's somebody that you're applying to a new fund, if there's an availability to call them up and have a discussion, if you can send them an email and arrange a call, please do that. We will always encourage people to phone us. It will help you be more likely to be successful in your application. The other thing, and this is something I've noticed recently, remember the funder doesn't know the people you work with, but you do. Oftentimes we see applications come in where it feels like the person that wrote it is assuming a level of knowledge that we don't have, because we don't know their work. And it's sometimes treating the person reading it as if they know absolutely nothing about your organisation. And that's sometimes difficult to do when you're in the thick of it and writing applications. And I say that as somebody who's a fundraiser for over a decade. So I've done it myself, but it is just remembering to explain and look at the needs and the impact that you will have for those beneficiaries. And finally, make sure that you focus on meeting the aims of the fund, tying all that together and looking at the information you've been given about the fund and making sure that you're hitting every key point, because those are the things that will help you get a successful application, which obviously we want to get as many as possible. For the organisation who's writing them, you don't want to waste your time. And also for the funders who are having to read through many, many more applications at the minute because of the amount of competition that's coming in and the amount of applications that people are making just because of the crisis that's happening at the moment. That is all from me. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer, or I'll pass back to Tracy.
Thanks, Jane. That was great. It's tough out there. I think we all know that. And I would just reiterate, there are a lot of free resources out there. So do make use of them if you're a fundraiser, a trustee, or if you're both. There are quite a few questions in the chat, but do keep them coming. I'm going to go right back to the beginning, because there was a few questions around raffles and whether you needed a license and tombolas. So Stephen has very kindly offered to answer those questions. So I'll hand over to you, Stephen.
Yes, hello. Someone was asking regarding raffles and stuff, and just I want to go through the very basics of it, if you like, to help. First thing to say is all raffles, tombolas, bingo nights, free prize draws, etc. are all basically monitored by the Gambling Commission. So they're the people that you need to go and ask, talk to if you've got any questions, and they are really friendly. I call them all the time. I think they're going to block my number soon because I keep calling them with asking them lots of questions. So please do, they're very helpful. The short one, the sort of very basics you need to know is, so the kind of two main lotteries, you've got your incidental lotteries. These are the kind of things where you're running a raffle at a ceilidh, for example. They don't need licensing. However, the rules are they mustn't be the reason for the event. The reason people are going there is to enjoy a ceilidh, not to enter a raffle. And you can use like raffle ticket stubs and the kind of cloakroom tickets that we all see and all know from raffles. The raffles have to be drawn at the event, and you can't sell any tickets in advance. If you're looking to do something that is being sold over a multiple timescale, then what you're looking at is a small society lottery, which you can apply to your local council for. That will then cover you for the whole of the UK. So depending on how quickly you need it, potentially pick the person who is applying, who is in a local, more rural council, because they will be faster, they've got less to do. And that license is connected to an individual, not the organization. That means that if that individual screws up, your organization doesn't get blacklisted, just the individual does. But you guys won't do that anyway. There are limits on the amount of money that you can raise from that license. You can't raise more than £20,000 from a single draw, or more than £250,000 over a calendar year. However, if you're in that situation, then congratulations, you're doing a lot better than my small society lotteries are. I will put the links to that pay to the Gambling Commission website in the chat, and that's got more information, a bit more details about kind of everything that's going on. The final thing I should say quickly about small society lotteries is you can't do deals on your tickets. Every ticket must be the same value. So for example, you can't sell your tickets for £3, but you could get 2 tickets for a £5. That's an absolute no-no under a small society lottery. But I'll stick this in the chat, as I said, and if you've ever got any questions to the Gambling Commission, give them a call. They're really good and really helpful.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. That was really comprehensive. There was another question in the chat from Medina, and she was just wanting to know what kind of complaints do the panel get? Is there any kind of themes to them, Dion?
So they can be quite varied. There are things that we see come up commonly, quite similar to the fundraising regulator. So things like charity clothes collection bags. There are other kind of complaints that we've had in the past, might be to do with a complaint about misleading information, for example, complaints about trust and grants fundraising, or perhaps the relationship between a charity and a third-party fundraiser. It's incredibly varied. I'd say one of the sort of top complaints is charity clothing collection bags. Is something that comes up quite often.
Okay. In terms of the bags are not really clear where the money's going, or are they complaints about the actual charity that the bag has featured
More
on?
where the charity has popped a bag through a door where it's clearly signposted that they don't want bags through, and obviously that's a breach.
Right. Okay, it's interesting. And I have heard the charity doesn't actually get a great deal of money from the charity clothes collection things, but that's another webinar, I'm sure. Okay, I'm just having a look to see if there's any other questions come in here. I've got one from Chrissy. Small organisation, small team, and they've had to lose a few staff. So they don't have enough people to do the operational stuff and can't afford a fundraiser. So they're feeling, I suppose they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They can't grow because they don't have the staff to put into fundraising, and the trustees really are going to have to roll up their sleeves as there's no one else. Anne Hughes, I wondered, could you comment on that one?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm maybe more unique in that I'm on the board of such a big organisation, and I totally understand that is going to be the position with smaller charities. I think it's about having that clarity, and certainly this was a case down in England, one of the women that I mentor, and they never made it clear that they actually wanted her to be a fundraiser. So when she ended up as their fundraiser, she just felt as if she had 2 jobs. And I think that there's also something like within most fundraisers' contracts, it'll be that you won't fundraise for actively for any other party. And so they're actually risking their own jobs. If essentially, I don't think it would ever come to anything. I've never heard that it has, but I think it's just about being really clear if you ask a fundraiser to join your board that you actually want them to be operational, because in that case they might decide it's not the right board for them, and if they decide it is, then fantastic, you know, that's a great result for the organisation. So I think it's probably just about clarity at the very start of why you want people to join your board and what exactly will be expected of them while they're there, would be my advice on that one.
Yeah, clarity on the roles and responsibilities. Hazel, you've just raised your hand.
Yeah, sorry, pressed all the wrong buttons. It was just a question there, Anne. You were talking about being upfront and clear about the roles and responsibility. Is that something that would be written into the terms of reference as a trustee when you were joining the board?
Well, no, the terms of reference are just mine are the same as everybody else's on the board. I would imagine I'm not one of the office bearers, so that's our lawyer, our chair and our accountant. So in our vice chair, I'm not involved in whatever they might have signed that I could see would be different. again, within my board, yes, we need to have a lawyer on the board, we need to have an accountant on the board, but that is just for an overseeing and being able to easily explain everything that's going on in our papers to the rest of the board. They aren't our lawyer and they aren't our accountant. We've got those as well. So I think, yeah, it's about that real clarity at the start. And I think that is only fair, because what ends up happening, and certainly what happened in that one, was that she ended up walking away from the board, and so they just got back onto that treadmill of trying to recruit a board member who also understood fundraising. I think if they had been a wee bit more transparent with her at the start, then she would have, maybe she would have joined and she wouldn't have felt taken advantage of, which is what I think she did. So I think it's just, again, about being really clear about why you need board members, and I think it's okay as well in that interview process, that sifting process, to be saying, what is it that you're going to bring to our board? Because that's really important too, isn't it, of course?
Yeah, I'm just thinking if, somebody, like, if that's the proviso that you start out with, but then because of the cost of living, and you say that the team might shrink, of falling into that role by accident. So Yvonne, is that something that people could write into the terms of reference, like challenge back a little bit and put in a wee disclosure of, I'm coming with the fundraising knowledge, but I'm not going to be a fundraiser?
Yeah, I think that's something quite important for people to really establish what their role is and what their remit is. I mean, particularly it's interesting to hear about like lawyers on a board. Like, I'm not a practicing lawyer anymore. I'm obviously using my legal experience in boards that I'm on, because I'm on charitable boards as well. But I'm very clear that I am not your lawyer. You're not, you've got a separate lawyer that you take advice from, and I'm just, giving my own view on it. And I think similarly for fundraisers, it'll be the same. Set that out in the beginning, and that should, when you're recruiting, because if you want someone to be very active, I think that's really important that they're clear on that and understand that, and you understand what they're going to be able to give to you as well.
Yeah. Carol has just suggested there's an American model of having a fundraising board, so sort of like a sub-team, subcommittee. So you would have to look into, really, do your fundraisers need to be on the board? Do they need to be trustees? Can they be volunteer fundraisers? So there's lots to think about there. I think we're all aware that recruitment of trustees is very difficult. And I would just highlight at this point, I'm going to come to you, Stephen, but just to highlight that Good Moves at the moment, we have a special offer, which is free trustee advertising for the months of November and December. So if that's something you're interested in, I will put that in the email that goes out to you. But yeah, contact the Good Moves team and you can get access to over 80,000 people that are looking to get involved in the sector. Stephen, did you want to add anything at the end?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, on the kind of more back to Chrissy's original point, is have a look at volunteer fundraisers. They can be a huge bonus for you and end up bringing quite a bit of money. One of my former charities I work at, one of our service users, in fact, actually had the opportunity to go and speak at a local Rotary Club, and I saw the other day that actually that Rotary Club has since organised a sponsored walk for that charity. So it might start off very small. You might need to look after them at the very beginning, but it's also a really good way of bringing in that additional income. And kind of, as mentioned about, was it Carol with the American model? You never know who's going to be in their little black book. I remember back in my student fundraising days, we almost had, before he was big, James Corden coming and presenting one of our books because his agent was one of the volunteers. His daughter, was the daughter. His agent was the mum of one of our volunteers, and so she called up her mum and was like, "Hey, who in your little black book is free on this night?" And we missed him by a day. So that's always a good way to go as well.
Great, thank you. Well, we're running out of time and there aren't any questions in the chat. We have covered an awful lot in this hour, and I would like to thank all of our speakers because we've certainly packed a lot in. Today's session is part of a series of webinars that SCVO are running to celebrate Trustees Week. We've got another one tomorrow, and that's going to look at the key skills a trustee needs to have. And then one on Thursday, and that's with our free legal and tax advice service partners, where we'll be looking at information trustees need to survive and thrive during the current cost of living crisis. We've still got a few places left on both, so have a look on the website if you want to join us at that. It would be lovely to have you there. And that just remains for me to thank everybody. Thank you all for coming, and thank our speakers again. And if you're an existing trustee, as I said, we do have an SCVO trustee network, details of that on the website. And thank you and enjoy the rest of Trustees Week. Goodbye.